Drilling fluids touch just about everything in the drilling process. We're here to deconstruct the drilling process and drilling fluid concepts to provide a deeper understanding of our industry. In each episode, we'll share information, talk to interesting people, and maybe share a few stories along the way. Welcome to the Flowline, a production of AES Drilling Fluids, brought to you by Matt Offenbacher and Justin Gauthier.
And we're back. Welcome to another episode of the Flowline. This is take 2.
Cool.
We had an amazing intro. We're not going to do it again, but I failed to hit record, and so rookie mistake. Although I'm not a rookie, and so anyway, we had a good run with this not happening. But statistically speaking, it will happen, and it did happen today. Anyway, I hit record this time. We're recording. We're going to dive into it. Matt probably doesn't want to have to banter with me in my shenanigans that I typically start with.
It was actually great, but we can't bring the same energy twice. We'll try again some other time.
Exactly. And with that said, let's talk about drilling fluids, but not even really specifically drilling fluids. But for those out there, I'm sure everyone's heard about ChatGPT and is using it, and it's depending on which side of the fence you're on, you might completely depend on it, or you use it in the right way. But naturally, people can they can use it, and it can hurt them in some sense. And so when you talk about it in the workplace, it can be dangerous depending on how you use it. But large language models could be a mud nightmare. And Matt, I would love for you to elaborate.
Well, the big thing for me is in the technical world, these models are trained in general on information that's publicly available. Not to say you can't use agents and train on your own data, and we'll get into that. But if you ask, let's say, ChatGPT a mud question, it will give you an answer. It will be very confident in that answer. But because there is such limited information that is publicly available, it can give you some very hot garbage. Just start making things up. And we're already having some of these encounters with a few customers where, hey, what do you know about this? And it's like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And so it's one of those, we just want people to be careful, and these things always get better, right? This stuff is moving at a really fast pace. I don't know, outside of, well, first off, I think you and I both use these AI tools for a variety of things, even just help me clean up this email or give me a list of some ideas. But when it comes to the technical, many of the things we talk about on a podcast like this, have you tried anything with one of these tools?
Yeah, honestly, it's been a while. I did more when this stuff slowly first came out, and I guess the experience was, it was almost like talking to one of the, like someone that's been exposed to mud, who knows enough to be dangerous, but when you actually, it doesn't quite make sense, but to someone who doesn't understand, it might make sense. It was almost like talking to someone who thought they knew more than they did. And then I would ask, are you sure? Or this, and then all of a sudden, oh, you know what? Good catch. And it's like, yeah, no kidding. Because, again, it's not a real person, but it acknowledged that, oh, maybe that wasn't correct. And then at that point I was like, okay, like this is clearly not talking to someone like yourself, thinking that, ChatGPT can then replace Matt Offenbacher, because that will never be the case.
Never.
Unless, I guess if they took all of our podcasts, maybe, we could create a chatbot based off the Flowline. But anyway, nonetheless, yes, I've tried it, and it wasn't perfect by all means. Well,
and I think one of the important things when we think about these models is where they get their information. So one, it's probabilistic, right? So it is assembling things that most likely go together to provide you an answer. And within the realm of probability, sometimes it can just make things up because it's not a high probability, but it's still possible. And so this is why sometimes these things can go a little crazy, and there's been a lot of work towards minimizing and reducing hallucinations. The reason that drilling fluid still is a very high-risk area is because we don't, other than, this podcast, of course, we don't put a lot of information out there that is, public for these models to train on.
Right.
So an overwhelming amount of particularly technical information comes from a lot of it is academic sources, so it's more theoretical.
Yeah.
It may not even be something, maybe some research that was funded by somebody and, hey, this could work, but that doesn't mean it ever did or it was ever used. There's just things like that. And so when you have most mud companies aren't just putting all their information out there, that's, a challenge.
Yeah. And I guess where the danger lies is and to kind of supplement that is there's a lot of the domain expertise and the things that actually apply are kind of nuanced, and there's so many dependencies, and unless you've got that sort of that depth of knowledge to answer a question that may be technical, because a lot of times, and if you've listened long enough, a common answer for whether it's Matt or I is it depends, right? And these models are not going to dive deep enough to say, well, what do you mean by this? And are you talking about this or that? Or which bench are you referring to when you ask? So it doesn't know enough to ask more leading questions to then fine-tune the answer. It's more just, like you said, like, well, based on this paper, I'm going to get a response together or whatever information that it's pulling from. But I will say, like, from a math perspective, I've tried it like, I've got, a kick and here's the inputs, and then it can quickly calculate, well, here's your, equivalent mud weight. But
yes,
there's a lot more to our job than just calculating equivalent mud weight or, what the circulating time is going to be on a rig.
Yeah. No, I mean, we're not here to pan this outright. I think it's more just to proceed with caution, because the training data, even technical papers, I mean, I've expressed some of my frustration, but technical papers, particularly on, one Petro, I get a hit rate about 1 out of every 3 is what I would consider quality. And that's with me kind of knowing where to go.
Yeah.
And so you could from these, like, it could be, and by quality, I mean relevant. A paper could have been written in the 30s and it wasn't wrong for the time, but it certainly doesn't apply to what we do today. It could be that the quality is just bad. I mean, that happens too. But if those are the things that could be possibly informing a large language model, you're right. It's not going to ask those questions. It's not going to gather the whole context. And
right.
I think that sometimes when we're trying to provide the best possible service, customers are sometimes like, just give me a yes or no, and we're always sort of looking for that gray area. But and also just the disproportionate amount of information that is out that might not be as practical. So there is a ton of literature. We've talked about this before, but like cesium formate, brine. There's all kinds of literature out there. The people that sell and promote formates, I mean, it's got a lot of great things, but there's so much out there, and it's written in such a way that it's like, this solves all of life's problems. The part they leave out is how much it costs.
Right, yeah.
And it's limited availability. And a number of other things that I get more than on one occasion. I'll have a customer call and say, I want that. Because they read a paper, they read a magazine article, and then I have to explain the context, explain the limitations. It might not even be a good application.
Yeah.
But without all that information, everything you read says, I'd be foolish not to try this,
Yeah.
So the challenge we have, even what products do what, because you have like a trade name. If it can't see the product bulletin, if it can't do some of these other things, you end up with this influx of confidently bad information.
Yeah.
And then I think it just starts to get concerned because we're not having, an eye-to-eye conversation. It's someone trying to correct the record, somebody else saying, perhaps I don't believe you, or I'm convinced because I trust this thing more than you.
Yeah.
And so I think there should be a healthy amount of skepticism, but there are some really good ways to use it. I mean, I like that you mentioned when it gives you that answer, if you ask, are you sure about this? Like, half the time it'll be like, no, actually.
Yeah.
I made it all up.
Right.
But if we're not careful in how we prompt and how we follow up with prompts,
Yeah.
and I think it's the further you get above your skis, the more you have to be very cautious how you consume that information.
Yeah.
It may even be take me to the source of where you got this, a reference.
I do that a lot, actually. If it has, if it's stating something as fact, or if it's stating something as absolute, I always, because in ChatGPT you can highlight it and then you can ask, follow. And I'll say, where did you source this information? And then sometimes it may be something that's outdated, or something that I was like, yeah, but that's not really and for the most part, it's like usually a credible source. And I don't know, maybe because over time it's learned that like I kind of try and sift through the nonsense. But yeah, you can get pretty granular and like figuring out where it's sourcing the information from, which then, you can gather, okay, well, this doesn't seem good, or you can hopefully use your best judgment to then use that as truth or not. But, certainly double clicking into the answers to be able to justify something is extremely important, instead of just taking it and then running with it.
Yeah.
Funny sort of, I won't name the operator, but I was with a gentleman, a friend of mine who works somewhere, and he had a younger engineer recently hired, and he was suspicious of this individual using ChatGPT, or I think they can only use Copilot.
Okay.
But like literally doing every task on Copilot. Everything seemed too robotic, and he asked the individual, like, are you using Copilot for literally everything? And he was like, yeah. Like, why wouldn't I? Like, well, no, like, you have to actually do some stuff. But the individual who was doing this like felt like it was totally normal. Yeah. And so there was this weird like, okay, is this like a learning opportunity? I can't tell him he can't because it's available to them as a tool. And it became kind of this odd, like for the individual that was doing it, but also the individual who, was trying to train and help this guy. And it was like, yeah, we're faced with that now, right? Like in 5 years from now, this is going to be so common to where people are going to say, hey, so what tools can I use? And then are you then doing your job just as like a prompt person? Or are you doing your job as someone who's trying to like, really understand and solve problems with it? It's a tough way to look, or I guess, I don't know, it's going to be challenging, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Because it's happening.
Yeah, I mean, there's real fear of, like, what does entry level look like if I can, sort of just look a bunch of that stuff up or automate it.
Yeah.
And I think, entry level gets a little more advanced. But, I think the problem or the challenge in that scenario is you have somebody who's inexperienced using that tool and not recognizing when it's either not wrong or not recognizing what an expected finished work product is to look like. And so it's one of those, like, as long as this thing keeps telling me I'm doing it right, how can I be doing it wrong?
Right.
And it goes back to like, okay, well, I don't want to be a Luddite and say, hey, you need to do this all by hand. Like, that's the only way you're going to learn.
Sure.
I mean, sometimes that's the case, but
yeah, a
lot of it is like, no, show me how you're using this tool. Let's get it right.
Yeah.
I think the best ways that I've encountered to use, though, are you have that working knowledge and you say, hey, clean this up.
Yeah.
Or, hey, I'm really wrestling with, can you give me the pros and cons of using these two different, drilling fluid systems, for example?
Yeah.
Or here's a scenario. What is the best, what are the best products that I should consider and why?
Right.
And sort of gives you a breakdown, but because you know enough, it's like, oh, wait, I didn't realize. Yeah, I forgot. Like, silicates. I haven't used those in a long time, but they should be on the board for this.
Right.
So it sort of brings up things where you're like, okay, that wasn't at the top of my head, but what a great way to remind me. And yeah, it belongs in there.
I almost, and I don't know if this is the best way to describe, but I've now got to a point where I use it to expand my thought process.
Yes, I think that's, same.
You know
Absolutely.
what I mean? And so it's like, here's what I'm thinking. Here's where I'm leaning. What am I not thinking of? Or is there a different angle that I need to consider? Or, you know what I mean? But again, it's not like, give me the answer for X, right?
Yeah.
So, but anyway, so kind of moving into, and we've already started talking about it, Matt, other good ways to use it, you mentioned like from some of the stuff that you've asked it on, say, chemistry or stuff that doesn't necessarily require a bunch of knowledge on like drilling operations, but more from like a lab perspective. Would you say it's a little bit more dummy proof, or is that still tough?
I think it's much better. I think one of the really fun things is like Hey, draw me this molecule, or tell me like I'm 5 how an anionic dispersant works, and
Right.
give me some different examples. And the cool thing is, I think this is why these things are just so amazing for education, is it can dumb down things really quickly.
That part of it's nice.
And so I use it all the time to put things together for mud schools,
Right.
because it helps me generate graphics. It helps me come up with good sort of like metaphors to explain things and illustrate things, or even activities we can do in the class. So I think on the like basics, because that stuff is pretty well known, I used it a lot. I had to do a bunch of stuff on like polymer chemistry, and it was the different kinds of starches. And I mean, it's hard to get people excited about these kinds of things, but
Yeah.
trying to illustrate why one starch tolerates salt way better than another one, it was able to help me through that process.
Right.
There have been times, I remember there was one time I was arguing about some form of oxidation to improve temperature stability, and it was like, actually, no, that's wrong. And then I was like, well, what about this? And it like paused for a second. It was like, actually, you're right. That is the one case where this is true.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was just one of those like, okay, follow your suspicions,
Yeah.
and then kind of work with it. But I think it really helps when you're trying to learn the nuts and bolts, or see how the products work together. Those things I think can be really, really educational and accessible.
Right.
And I think that's the big part, is you don't have to have a PhD in chemistry for it to make sense.
Yeah.
And so I think that's been super cool. And then I think the other part of it is, you've mentioned it to some degree, but with something like Copilot, but companies are using or starting to use these things where the model can be trained on it.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have your internal information, and you can say, look, how does this work? And it pulls from your own company's documents, or maybe a mix of that and some publicly available information, and it gives a little bit more of that context. I think that really improves the quality of what you're going to get. And I know, it's something we look at all the time with respect to, what kind of agents could just make some recommendations or do some things. We see them all the time. We have the data.
Yeah.
Why couldn't we plug this in and shed some light on something?
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot there, but there's a big difference between what you're doing, how you're using it, and what you're going to do with it.
Right.
Once you take it in.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would say, again, there's a ton of upside to the future in this. I mean, you look at from training, again, when we talk about entry level, for instance, we have a gentleman coming and doing sort of like an informal internship. I don't think he's done it, but if I was someone doing that, I would be on. I mean, I would, if assuming, let's just say, company X had an internal chatbot that you could understand the company, left to right, side to side, within reason. Obviously, there would be boundaries for confidentiality, but to be able to understand like who you work for, and if you could ask any questions about the company, and if you got curious, just to get a better grasp of how we fit into a bigger puzzle, if you will. To me, that would be super helpful. And I was even talking to a lady in HR today, and she was asking about a certain role, and it was like kind of like, so what do they even do? And rightfully so. If you're locked in with HR and you're doing your thing, sometimes other departments you're not exactly quite sure. But I mean, going in there and talking and saying, well, what does this individual do, or what is this role really like? How do they fit into everything? Internal chatbots, I think, would be something helpful in the future, and I think for us, it's probably the direction we'll go, maybe for mud engineers to ask offset information or whatever. But
Yeah.
I guess my question then on that thought is like, what do you think about internal chatbots, and do you think there's a place for something like that to exist in the workforce or in our world?
Absolutely. So I mean, it's definitely the direction we're going. The big thing in general that we see is having your data structured in a way to benefit the most matters.
Yeah.
And so it's sort of weird to be putting together some of these things, and it's almost like, normally you want to be like as brief as possible, but you already know the chatbot like is going to do that for you. Yeah. And so you add your own context to make sure that it understands how to respond.
Right.
So it's sort of the opposite of like, if I was just writing this as like a summary for you to read, but if you're going to query a chatbot, I want to add extra detail.
Yeah.
So that it picks it all up. And even, we have our new reporting system, Fluid Optics, that, many of our folks are using now, but that was organized in such a way so that these tools, which we knew were in the pipeline when this was written, could take the most advantage of it.
Nice.
And I think the cool thing is, as much as we sort of have plans for things, this is very early on in the cycle where we're positioned to take advantage of whatever comes next. At least that's how I see it.
Yeah.
So I think, the next year or two, we'll have a lot of kind of exciting advancements taking advantage of these tools.
Yeah.
But hopefully the other cool thing is, like, from an internal perspective, like, hopefully our people can feel more connected to everything we do.
Yeah.
Because they have quicker access to information just about the company or about different people. And, I hope that it's easy to get answers, but it's also easy to reach people. It's not just like, well, I don't have to talk to anyone anymore because
right.
I can work on an island.
Yeah. No, that's so true. It's an interesting and evolving conversation. There's just so much buzz about it. And, with that said, I mean, for the listeners out there, if you have any thoughts or ideas or even questions, and maybe you have, some good use cases for stuff like this, and you're a mud engineer perhaps, or, drilling, or, any engineer, anyone working on the technical side, would be super fascinated to hear how you're using these tools. And, Matt, anything else before we kind of close up shop here?
No, I just thought it would be an interesting thing to kick around, because we've had a few interesting conversations based upon LLM informed concepts, and it required some muddling through some things to get some clarity. So
yeah. And please don't just copy and paste out of ChatGPT or Copilot into your email, because it's getting to be very easy to see who's emailing using it. And even on LinkedIn, like, you'll see someone with a comment that doesn't really understand what they're saying, but you can tell like a chatbot created a response or a comment on something, and I get a kick out of that every time I see it. But anyway, with that being said, folks, please subscribe, leave a review. Always is good. If you have any ideas for a show, please reach out to us on LinkedIn, or you can reach us at the Flowline podcast at aesfluids.com. Matt, we released a tech tip, did we not? Recently? What one was that?
We're talking about film strength.
Big deal in the old lubricant world.
Yeah.
And so again, for those who like to sort of visually learn, check out the YouTube page. A lot of great content on there. And shoot, man, that's about it. Am I missing anything, Matt? I feel rusty.
No, I think we're good.
All right. Well, with that being said, folks, the holidays is near. Be safe out there. Take care. Until next time. Cheers.
Take care.
Thanks for listening. Please tune in next week for another exciting episode of the Flowline. And remember, may your returns always be full and your trips always smooth. Views expressed in this program belong to participants and not their employees. The program is for informational purposes only and cannot take the place of seeking professional advice. Copyright AES Drilling Fluids.